She rescued a billionaire from the paparazzi. 3 days later, he returned with all his fortune. It sounds impossible, but it all starts when a quiet, older bookshop owner pulls a terrified stranger out of a storm of flashing cameras. She thinks she's just helping a man in trouble, but the world sees him as a billionaire on the edge of a breakdown. And when he comes back, clean, powerful, and surrounded by security, he brings something nobody expects, every dollar he owns, offering to save her failing shop and her entire neighborhood. But the moment she lets hope in, everything turns upside down. Someone powerful wants to destroy them. The media turns on her. And the truth behind why he disappeared is darker than anyone knows. Now she has to decide, is this a blessing sent to her door, or a disaster about to blow up her whole life? What will she risk when kindness pulls her into a billionaire's secret war? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The morning sky hung heavy and grey over downtown, its somber clouds releasing a steady drizzle that painted the sidewalks dark with moisture. Delia Hart stood at her bookshop's window, her reflection ghosting against the glass as she watched droplets trace lazy patterns down the pane. The quiet patter of rain matched the gentle rhythm of her heart, a sound that had become all too familiar in the empty store. Her weathered hands moved automatically through the morning routine, dusting shelves that hardly needed it anymore. There were so few customers these days to disturb the thin layer of dust that seemed to settle everywhere. The wooden floorboards creaked beneath her feet as she made her way to the front door, each step echoing in the silence that had become her constant companion. Another day, she whispered to herself, flipping the sign from closed to open. The brass bell above the door tinkled softly, its cheerful sound almost startling in the morning quiet. That's when she heard it, the rapid slap of footsteps on wet pavement, growing louder by the second. Delia peered through the rain-streaked window just as a man came sprinting down the sidewalk, his expensive suit soaked through, his face a mask of desperation. Behind him, a group of people wielding cameras and shouting questions gave chase, their voices carrying through the morning drizzle. Without thinking twice, Delia pushed open her door. "In here!" she called out, her voice carrying just enough to catch the man's attention. He changed direction mid-stride, nearly slipping on the wet concrete as he darted toward her shop. As soon as he crossed the threshold, Delia quickly pulled him inside and locked the door behind them. The man bent over, hands on his knees, trying to catch his breath as water dripped from his clothes onto her floor. Outside, the paparazzi pressed against the window, cameras flashing, their shouts muffled by the glass. "This way," Delia said softly, placing a gentle hand on his arm. She guided him through the maze of bookshelves, past the poetry section, and around the corner where old leather-bound classics lined the walls. The back room was small but cozy, with a worn armchair tucked into the corner beside a small table that held an electric kettle and some teacups. The man practically collapsed into the chair, his chest heaving. In the dim light filtering through the dusty window, Delia could see he was younger than she'd first thought, maybe in his early 40s, with dark hair plastered to his forehead from the rain. His expensive suit was rumpled and wet, but what caught her attention most were his eyes, dark and haunted, like someone carrying a weight too heavy to bear alone. "Thank you," he managed between breaths. I'm... He paused, seemingly struggling with what to say. "Just call me Gray." Delia nodded, not pressing for more information. The pounding on her front door grew louder, and she could hear voices calling out questions. "Mr. Henderson, just one comment about the merger. What's your response to the accusations?" She moved quietly around the small room, her presence calm and steady as she reached for the electric kettle. "Would you like some tea? It might help settle your nerves." Gray shook his head, his breathing finally evening out. "No, thank you. I've already imposed enough." His voice was soft, cultured, but carried an edge of exhaustion that made Delia's heart ache. They sat in companionable silence for 20 minutes, listening as the commotion outside gradually died down. The pounding on the door ceased, and the shouting voices grew distant and eventually disappeared altogether. Through it all, Delia simply sat in the other chair, her hands folded in her lap, offering the gift of quiet presence. Finally, Gray stood up, straightening his wet jacket with trembling hands. "I can't thank you enough," he said, his eyes meeting hers briefly before darting away. Is there a back way out?" Delia led him to the rear door that opened into the alley behind the shop. Before stepping out, Gray turned to her one last time, as if wanting to say something more, but instead just gave a slight nod and slipped away into the grey morning. The rest of the day passed slowly, as most days did now. Delia moved through the quiet shop, straightening books that didn't need straightening, her mind continually drifting back to her mysterious visitor. She remembered the way his hands had shaken, how his eyes had darted around like a trapped animal's before finally finding moments of peace in her back room sanctuary. As she reshelved a few novels that a browser had left out of place, she wondered about Gray's story. What had brought him to this point, running through the rain from people who wanted to capture his image, his words? The weight of untold burdens had been visible in the slope of his shoulders, the tightness around his eyes. Evening came early, as it often did on rainy days. Delia locked up the shop and made her way home to her small apartment just 2 blocks away. The drizzle had finally stopped, but the air remained heavy with moisture, and the streetlights created halos in the mist. In her kitchen, she warmed up a simple soup she'd made the day before, vegetable with a little barley, nothing fancy. The apartment was quiet except for the soft clink of her spoon against the bowl and the distant sound of traffic. She sat at her small table, looking out her window at the city lights blurred by condensation on the glass. Her mind kept returning to those haunted eyes. That moment of desperate flight turned to temporary refuge. In her many years running the bookshop, she'd seen all sorts of people come through her doors, happy, sad, lost, found. But something about Gray's raw vulnerability, so at odds with his expensive suit and cultivated manner, had touched her heart in a particular way. The soup grew cold in its bowl as Delia sat there, lost in thought. She'd spent so many evenings like this since Robert passed, quiet dinners for one, conversations held only in memory. But tonight felt different somehow, as if the day's strange encounter had shifted something in the air, disturbed the dust that had settled over her life, like it had over her beloved books. She finished her soup, washed her bowl, and prepared for bed, all while that morning's events played over and over in her mind like a movie she couldn't quite make sense of. Even as she turned out the lights and climbed into bed, she could still see those haunted eyes, still feel the trembling, nervous energy that had filled her back room. Something about that brief encounter felt unfinished, like a story whose final chapters remained unwritten. The morning light filtered through Delia's kitchen window, catching the steam rising from her oatmeal. She reached for the remote control and turned on the small television that kept her company during breakfast, a habit she'd developed in the years since Robert's passing. The morning news droned on as she stirred honey into her bowl, her mind still half caught in yesterday's strange encounter. And in breaking business news, the anchor's voice suddenly sharpened with urgency. The literary and business worlds remain in upheaval following the disappearance of Grayson Wilde. The spoon slipped from Delia's fingers, clattering against the bowl. On the screen, a photograph filled the frame. A man in an expensive suit at some charity event, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. But those eyes, Delia knew those eyes. They were the same ones that had looked at her with such desperation just yesterday morning. The billionaire novelist and CEO of Wild Publishing hasn't been seen since his apparent breakdown at yesterday's shareholder meeting. The anchor continued. Sources say Wild left the building in a state of distress after, announcing the indefinite delay of his highly anticipated new novel. His spokesperson has issued no comment, and concerns are growing. Delia's hands trembled as she fumbled for the remote, rewinding the segment. She watched it again, and then a third time, studying the photograph. There was no doubt her rain-soaked visitor had been Grayson Wild himself. The oatmeal grew cold as Delia sat there, her mind whirling. She'd known her visitor was troubled, but she hadn't imagined the scope of his situation. A billionaire, a famous author. No wonder those photographers had been so persistent. Guilt began to creep in around the edges of her thoughts as she washed her breakfast dishes. Should she have done more? Asked more questions? Called someone? The man had clearly been in crisis, and she'd just let him walk away into the rain. But what else could I have done? She murmured to her empty kitchen. He was a grown man who needed space, not a lost child. Still, the questions followed her as she made her way to the bookshop. The morning air was crisp and clear after yesterday's rain, but Delia barely noticed. Her eyes kept scanning the streets, half expecting to see more photographers, or perhaps even Grayson himself. The shop felt different when she unlocked it, as though yesterday's events had changed something fundamental about the space. She walked to the back room, looking at the chair where he'd sat, remembering how his breathing had gradually steadied in the quiet among the books. The day brought a steady trickle of customers. A young mother looking for picture books, an elderly gentleman seeking a specific mystery novel, a couple of high school students killing time between classes. Delia helped them all with her usual patience and care, but her mind kept wandering back to Grayson Wild. She found herself glancing at the bestseller shelf, where several of his books sat. She'd read them all, of course. She made a point of reading everything she stocked, but now she saw them in a new light. The stories of complex characters facing moral dilemmas, of people trying to find their way back to themselves. Had they come from the same well of pain she'd glimpsed in his eyes? The afternoon sun was slanting through the windows when the bell above the door chimed, and Naomi Brooks walked in. The young teacher's bright smile was like a burst of sunshine in the dusty shop. "Miss Hart?" Naomi called out cheerfully, adjusting her tote bag on her shoulder. "Please tell me you've got some new chapter books in. My kids are racing through everything I bring them." Delia felt some of her tension ease at the familiar sight of Naomi's enthusiasm. "Come see what just came in yesterday," she said, leading the way to a display of colorful middle-grade novels. As Naomi examined the books, exclaiming over ones she thought would appeal to specific students, Delia found herself wanting to share her secret. Here was someone she could trust, someone with both compassion and good sense. "Naomi," she said quietly, "something happened yesterday, something I'm not quite sure how to handle." Naomi looked up from the books, her expression turning serious at Delia's tone. "What is it? Are you okay?" Delia glanced around the empty shop before telling Naomi everything. The man in the rain, the photographers, the morning's news revelation. As she spoke, she could feel the weight of uncertainty lifting slightly, just by sharing it. When she finished, Naomi was quiet for a moment, thoughtfully tapping a book against her palm. "You know what I think?" she said finally. "I think you did exactly what you should have done. You showed kindness to someone in distress. You gave him what he needed most right then, safety and quiet. But should I have tried to help more? Should I tell someone now?" Naomi shook her head firmly. "Help more how? By forcing him to talk? By calling those photographers back? You gave him something precious, a moment of peace with no demands attached. That's what matters." Delia felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "I needed to hear that." They spent the next half hour picking out books for Naomi's students, their conversation drifting to lighter topics. The upcoming school play, a funny incident in Naomi's classroom, the new cafe opening down the street. By the time Naomi left with her arms full of books, Delia felt more centered, more at peace with her actions. The rest of the afternoon passed quietly. As closing time approached, Delia began her usual routine, straightening shelves, counting the register, preparing the deposit for tomorrow. But something felt different about the town tonight. The usual street sounds seemed muted, the shadows longer, the air heavier with expectation. Standing at the front window, ready to flip the sign to "Closed," Delia looked out at the empty sidewalk. The entire town seemed to be holding its breath, as though waiting for something to happen. She thought of Grayson Wilde, wondering where he was now, if he was safe, if he'd found whatever he was looking for when he ran from those photographers. The quiet felt alive somehow, pregnant with possibility. But for what, Delia couldn't say. The morning sun had barely cleared the horizon when Delia turned onto her street, coffee cup warming her hands against the early autumn chill. She slowed her steps, brow furrowing at the unusual sight before her. A line of gleaming black vehicles stretched along the curb outside her bookshop. 3 Mercedes sedans and a Range Rover, their polished surfaces reflecting the golden morning light. Her heart skipped a beat as a tall figure emerged from one of the cars. Even at a distance, she recognized him immediately. Gone was the rain-soaked, desperate man who had burst into her shop 3 days ago. In his place stood Grayson Wilde as the world knew him, clean-shaven, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent, his silver-streaked dark hair perfectly styled. 3 people clustered around him, all tapping on tablets or speaking quietly into phones. One woman in a crisp blazer held out a leather portfolio for him to sign. He did so without looking, his eyes fixed on Delia as she approached. "Mrs. Hart," he said warmly, stepping forward to meet her. His voice was steadier than she remembered, but held the same underlying gentleness. "I hope I haven't caught you too early." Delia clutched her coffee cup tighter, suddenly very aware of her sensible shoes and simple dress. "Mr. Wilde," she managed. "This is unexpected." He smiled. Not the practiced smile she'd seen in magazine photos, but something more genuine. "Would you mind if we spoke privately? I have something important to discuss." The woman with the portfolio started to protest, but Grayson silenced her with a gentle raise of his hand. "Give us an hour, Caroline. The world won't end if I'm offline that long." Delia found her keys with trembling fingers and unlocked the shop door. The bell chimed as they entered, the sound achingly familiar in this surreal moment. Grayson followed her inside, his expensive shoes clicking softly on the worn hardwood floor. The shop felt different with him in it, smaller somehow, yet more significant. He moved carefully between the shelves, touching book spines with reverent fingers as they made their way to the back room where he'd hidden days before. "Please sit," Delia offered, gesturing to the chairs by her small office desk. She set her coffee down, noticing how her hand shook slightly. Grayson settled into the same chair he'd occupied during his panic attack, though his posture was completely different now, controlled, composed, yet somehow more human than his public persona suggested. "First," he said quietly, "I need to thank you properly. What you did for me that day." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I was in the midst of what my therapist kindly calls a significant mental health crisis. I'd walked away from everything, my company, my responsibilities, my phone, my medication. I just broke." Delia's heart ached at the raw honesty in his voice. Anyone would have helped. she said softly. He shook his head. No. Most would have called the papers immediately, or tried to engage me, fix me, use me. You just gave me space to breathe. You have no idea what that meant. Sunlight filtered through the dusty window, catching the silver in his hair. He looked tired despite his polished appearance, like someone carrying a heavy weight with practiced grace. I've spent the last 3 days getting stabilized, he continued. Back on my medication, back in contact with my team. But I couldn't move forward without addressing what you did for me. He leaned forward slightly. And what I can do for you in return. Oh, that's not necessary. Delia started to protest, but he held up a hand. Please, let me finish. In my clearer moments this week, I've been looking into this neighborhood. I know about the development company that's been buying up properties. I know they've been pressuring small business owners to sell. I know they've approached you multiple times. Delia's chest tightened. The letters from the development company had become increasingly aggressive over the past year. Their latest offer had been significantly above market value, but still not enough to relocate the shop somewhere else downtown. I've already taken care of it, Grayson said simply. I'm buying the entire block. The words didn't register at first. When they did, Delia had to grip the edge of her desk. The development company was eager to sell once they saw my offer. The paperwork will be finalized this afternoon. His eyes crinkled slightly at the corners. Your rent will remain exactly what it is now, with a 99-year guarantee. The same goes for every other small business owner on the block who wants to stay. Delia's vision blurred with tears. Mr. Wilde, I can't possibly— Yes, you can, he said gently. This isn't charity, Delia. This is investment, in community, in kindness, in the kind of spaces that make cities actually livable. The world needs more places like this, where someone can walk in from the rain and find peace among the books. She looked around her beloved shop, at the shelves her late husband had built, the reading nook where neighborhood children gathered for story time, the wall of local author features she'd curated for 20 years. The thought of losing it had been crushing her slowly for months. I don't know what to say, she whispered. You don't have to say anything. Just keep doing what you're doing. Keep creating this space where stories live and people find sanctuary. He stood, straightening his jacket. My assistant will bring by the paperwork later. Everything will be handled through my foundation. You won't have to deal with any publicity or complications. The morning light had strengthened while they talked, warming the room. Delia could hear his team shifting restlessly outside, the usual street sounds beginning as the neighborhood woke up. Thank you, she managed finally, standing as well. Not just for this, but for trusting me with your story. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. Sometimes the smallest kindnesses have the biggest impact. You taught me that. They walked to the front of the shop in comfortable silence. Through the window, Delia could see his assistants looking at their watches, the world clearly anxious to reclaim him. Take care of yourself, she said softly as he reached for the door. I will. He paused, hand on the handle. And Delia, thank you for the refuge. She watched through misty eyes as he strode to the waiting cars, his team falling into step around him. Within moments, the sleek vehicles pulled away, leaving the street looking ordinary again, though nothing felt ordinary, any more. With trembling fingers, Delia turned the sign to closed. She needed time to process what had just happened, to sit with the overwhelming relief and gratitude that threatened to buckle her knees. Her shop was safe. Her community was safe. All because she had offered simple kindness to a stranger in the rain. The bell above the door chimed softly the next morning, and Delia looked up from her inventory list to find Grayson Wilde standing alone in the entrance. The sight was so different from yesterday's crowd of assistants that she had to blink twice to make sure she wasn't imagining things. "Good morning," he said, his voice carrying a hint of uncertainty that hadn't been there during his grand announcement the day before. "I was hoping we could talk more, if you're not too busy." Delia gestured to the empty shop. "As you can see, my morning rush is quite manageable." Her gentle humor drew a small smile from him as she led the way to a round table near the window, where morning sunlight warmed the worn wood surface. Once they were seated, Grayson's fingers drummed a nervous pattern on the table. Without his entourage and perfectly pressed suit, he seemed more human, more vulnerable. Today he wore a simple sweater and looked like he might have missed a spot shaving. "There's something I need to tell you," he began, "about why I'm really here." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "The truth is, saving your bookshop isn't just an act of gratitude, though I am genuinely grateful. I need your help, Delia." She folded her hands in her lap, waiting patiently as he continued. "My episode last week didn't go unnoticed by my company's board of directors. They're questioning my ability to lead, particularly given my history of mental health challenges." His voice grew quieter. "They're looking for any excuse to push me out of day-to-day operations." "But it's your company," Delia protested. "Your books built it." "And that's exactly why they can't remove me entirely, but they can significantly reduce my role if they believe I'm unstable." He ran a hand through his silver-streaked hair. "I need to prove I'm still capable of running major initiatives. That's where you come in." Delia felt her stomach tighten. "Me? I'm launching a comprehensive literacy program, working with local bookshops to create reading spaces, support local authors, and bring books to underserved communities." His eyes brightened as he spoke, showing real passion behind the strategy. "I want Hearts Haven to be our flagship location, the model we use across the country." The magnitude of what he was suggesting made Delia's head spin. "But I'm just a small neighborhood bookshop owner. I don't know anything about running national programs." "You know more than you think," Grayson insisted. "I've done my research. You've been running children's reading programs for years. You feature local authors. You know what works at the community level, exactly what we need." Delia stood up, needing to move. She walked to the nearest shelf, straightening books that were already perfectly aligned. "It's one thing to read stories to neighborhood children. It's another to be responsible for a national initiative." "You wouldn't be alone," Grayson said softly. "You'd have my entire team's support, but we need your heart, your understanding of what makes a bookshop more than just a store." The weight of the decision pressed on her shoulders. She thought of all the children who'd grown up reading in her shop's corners, the aspiring writers who'd found encouragement at her local author events, the lonely souls who'd discovered comfort between her shelves. Could she bring that to more communities? Should she even try? The bell chimed again, providing a welcome interruption. Elias Warren stepped in, his tall frame filling the doorway. He'd been coming in regularly for mystery novels since moving to the neighborhood 3 years ago, always with thoughtful recommendations and quiet conversation. "Morning, Delia," he said, then noticed her troubled expression. "Everything all right?" "Oh, yes," she said quickly, then paused. "Well, actually," she glanced at Grayson, who nodded slightly. "We're discussing some possible changes for the shop. Big changes." Elias listened carefully as she gave him a brief overview, his weathered face thoughtful. When she finished, he smiled. "Sounds like you might need some help getting the place ready for a bigger role. That back room could use some proper shelving for one thing." "Are you offering?" Delia asked, knowing his skill with woodwork from the projects he'd shown her photos of. "Been looking for a good reason to use my tools again," he said with a shrug. "Just let me know what you need." After Elias had selected his book, the latest in a detective series he was following, and left, Delia turned back to Grayson. Can I have some time to think about it? Of course, he said, standing. Take all the time you need, just... He hesitated. Don't let fear of failing stop you from trying. Sometimes the things that scare us most are exactly what we're meant to do. The rest of the day passed in a blur of routine tasks that felt suddenly small compared to the possibility before her. Delia helped customers find books, organized displays, and tried to imagine her tiny shop as the heart of something bigger. That night, lying in bed, sleep eluded her. The ceiling offered no answers as she stared up at it, her mind cycling through all the ways she might fail, all the people she might disappoint. But beneath the fear, another feeling stirred, a sense of purpose, of possibility. The same feeling she'd had the day she first opened the shop, when all she'd had was hope and a dream of creating a haven for book lovers. She thought of the children who might discover reading in shops like hers, of communities that might find connection through stories, of lives that might be changed by having a place to belong. The ceiling still held no answers, but her racing thoughts began to settle into something that felt like clarity. The fear was still there, but maybe, just maybe, it wasn't meant to stop her. Maybe it was meant to show her that this mattered enough to be scary. She rolled onto her side, pulling her blanket closer, knowing sleep wouldn't come easily, but feeling, for the first time, that she might be ready to face whatever tomorrow brought. The morning sun painted golden streaks across Delia's kitchen floor as she laced up her walking shoes. She hadn't slept much, but the crisp autumn air beckoned her outside. Walking had always helped clear her mind, especially since losing Robert 3 years ago. Her usual route took her through Palmer Park, where fallen leaves crunched beneath her feet and squirrels darted between trees. As she walked, Delia's thoughts drifted to Grayson's proposal. The magnitude of it still overwhelmed her, but something else stirred beneath the fear, a spark of possibility she couldn't ignore. She remembered Robert's words when they'd first opened the shop. Sometimes the scariest decisions lead to the most beautiful changes. By the time she reached the Morning Bean Cafe, her legs were tired, but her mind felt clearer. Through the window she spotted Grayson, already seated at a corner table, his laptop open before him. He looked different today, more human somehow, in a simple grey sweater instead of his usual suit. "Good morning," he said, standing as she approached. "I ordered you some tea. The owner said you prefer Earl Grey." Delia smiled, touched by the thoughtful gesture. "Thank you. Mary knows my habits well." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, steam rising from their cups. Finally, Delia took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about your proposal." Grayson closed his laptop, giving her his full attention. His eyes held none of the desperate energy from their first meeting, just patient interest. "I'll help you," she said, watching his expression brighten. "But I have conditions." "Of course." He nodded. "Name them." "This can't just be about saving your position with the board," Delia said firmly. "If we're going to do this, it has to make a real difference in people's lives. We need to create something that will last, something that truly serves the community." "Absolutely," Grayson agreed without hesitation. "To be honest, I've been thinking along similar lines. The board situation. It's important, yes, but this could be so much more than that." Delia pulled out her worn notebook, the same one where she'd been recording her shop's daily transactions for years. "I have some ideas." Over the next 2 hours, they outlined what would become the Bookshop Promise Initiative. Delia's pen moved swiftly across the pages as they brainstormed. Free weekly reading circles for children, after-school tutoring programs staffed by volunteer teachers and college students, monthly community, events featuring local authors and artists. "We could create a scholarship program," Grayson suggested, his own enthusiasm growing. Help promising young writers pursue their dreams. And workshops for adults who want to improve their literacy skills. Delia added, So many people feel ashamed about struggling with reading. We need to make it a safe space for everyone. They ordered second cups of tea, then third ones. Mary brought them fresh scones on the house, clearly curious about the intense discussion happening in her cafe's corner. Around noon, Grayson pulled out his phone. I have some contacts, people who might be interested in supporting this. Would you be comfortable if I set up some meetings? As long as they understand this isn't about creating another soulless corporate program, Delia said. We need partners who share our vision. Agreed, I'll start making calls this afternoon. Delia checked her own phone and found 3 messages from Naomi. Speaking of partners, I should reach out to some of the local teachers. Naomi's been asking about our children's section. She might be interested in helping coordinate the tutoring program. Perfect. Grayson smiled. We'll need people like her, people who understand both education and community. They spent another hour refining their plans. Grayson's business expertise complemented Delia's practical experience, helping transform vague ideas into actionable steps. By the time they finished, Delia's notebook contained 6 pages of detailed notes. The afternoon sun was casting long shadows when Delia returned to her shop. She had several calls to make, starting with Naomi. The young teacher answered on the second ring. Delia, I was just thinking about you. How are you holding up with everything? Actually, Delia said, settling into her favorite chair behind the counter, I have something exciting to discuss with you. How would you feel about being part of a literacy initiative? She explained the project, and Naomi's enthusiasm bubbled through the phone. This is exactly what our kids need. I know at least 3 other teachers who'd love to help. When can we start? We're still in the planning stages, Delia cautioned. But I'd love your input on the tutoring program structure. I'll start drafting some ideas tonight, Naomi promised. This is going to be amazing, Delia. I just know it. After making several more calls to other local teachers, to the library director, to the community center coordinator, Delia began her closing routine. She straightened books, counted the day's modest earnings, and updated her inventory list. But everything felt different now, charged with new purpose. Standing at the front door, key in hand, Delia paused. The street outside was quiet, streetlights just beginning to flicker on. Her reflection in the glass looked the same as always. Silver hair, laugh lines, sensible cardigan. But something had changed. The weight of uncertainty that had pressed on her shoulders this morning had transformed into something lighter, something that felt remarkably like hope. She locked the door, double-checking it as she had every night for 23 years. Tomorrow would bring meetings and decisions, challenges and possibilities. It would mark the beginning of something bigger than herself, bigger than her little shop. The thought still scared her, but it excited her too. Walking home in the gathering dusk, Delia felt the familiar mix of emotions that came with big changes, fear tangling with anticipation, doubt dancing with determination. But beneath it all ran a current of certainty. This was right. This was needed. This was, perhaps, exactly where her path had been leading all along. The morning sun cast long shadows through Heart's Haven Book's front windows as Delia arrived early, her arms full of fresh pastries from Mary's cafe. She wanted everything to be perfect for their first official meeting. As she arranged the treats on a small table near the register, the bell above the door chimed. "Good morning." Naomi breezed in, carrying a bright tote bag bursting with teaching materials. "I barely slept last night. I was so excited about today." Before Delia could respond, Elias appeared, tool belt slung over his shoulder. "Hope I'm not too early," he said, his quiet presence filling the space with steady calm. "Right on time." Delia assured him, just as Grayson's sleek car pulled up outside. The four of them gathered near the front counter, the morning light illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Delia felt a flutter of nerves in her stomach but pushed through it. This was her space, her expertise. "Let me show you around properly," she said, gesturing toward the maze of shelves. "I know it looks a bit cluttered now, but there's real potential here." She led them through the narrow aisles, pointing out sections as they went. "Children's books are here. We'll definitely need to expand this area. Mystery and thriller over there, classics along this wall." Her hand trailed along weathered shelves as she walked. "These built-ins are original to the building," she explained, touching the aged wood. "They need some care, but they're solid oak." Elias ran an expert hand along the shelving. "Beautiful craftsmanship. We could restore these instead of replacing them, keep the character, but make them functional again." Grayson nodded thoughtfully. "I agree. The charm of this place is in its history. We should enhance what's here rather than trying to make it something it's not." They reached the back room, currently stuffed with overflow inventory and old furniture. "This is where I found you that first day," Delia said softly to Grayson. He smiled, remembering. It felt safe here. Still does. "This could be perfect for the children's reading area," Naomi exclaimed, already envisioning the space. "We could add cushions, maybe some low tables. Make it cozy, but organized." Elias pulled out a small notebook and began sketching. "If we move these storage shelves, open up that corner, we could even add a window seat here." His pencil moved quickly across the paper. They spent the next hour discussing layout possibilities, with Elias taking detailed measurements and notes. Naomi's enthusiasm for the children's space was contagious, and soon they were all contributing ideas. "What about this section?" Grayson asked, gesturing to a cramped corner near the front. "Local authors and history," Delia explained. "It's always been important to me to support our community writers. We should expand that too," he suggested. "Make it a focal point. Show people that literature isn't just something that happens somewhere else. It's right here, in their neighborhood." As the morning progressed into afternoon, they began the physical work of reorganizing. Elias helped move the heavier shelves while Naomi and Delia sorted through books, creating piles for different sections. Grayson proved surprisingly adept at organizing, his publisher's eye catching miscategorized titles. "Look at this," Delia said, pulling out a dusty volume. "A first edition of local poetry from 1952. I'd forgotten we had it." They broke for lunch around 1 o'clock, sharing sandwiches from the deli down the street. The conversation flowed easily between them as they ate, discussing ideas for programming and community outreach. "I'm thinking we could start with 2 reading circles per week," Naomi suggested, spreading out her lesson plans. "One for younger children, one for older. We could focus on different themes each month." "And what about adult literacy programs?" Delia asked. "I've had several requests over the years, but never had the resources to help." Grayson leaned forward, interested. "We could partner with the community college, maybe offer evening classes." The afternoon was spent taking detailed inventory, with Elias working on repair plans while the others catalogued books. Delia found herself moving between groups, answering questions and sharing the history of different sections. "Each of these shelves has its own story," she explained to Grayson as they worked. "That corner became the mystery section because Mr. Peterson used to come in every Tuesday for his weekly detective novel. The poetry shelf expanded when Sarah Chen started teaching literature at the high school." As the day wore on, the shop slowly transformed. Boxes were unpacked, shelves reorganized, and spaces cleared for new purposes. By the time dusk began to fall, they had made significant progress, though much work remained. "I can't believe how much we accomplished," Naomi said, gathering her things. "This is really happening!" Elias collected his tools, promising to return with materials for the shelf restoration. "We'll start with the built-ins first, then work our way through the rest." As they prepared to leave, Grayson turned to Delia. "Would you like company on your walk home? It's getting dark." She nodded, suddenly aware of how tired she was. They said goodbye to Naomi and Elias, then stepped out into the cool evening air. They walked in comfortable silence for a few blocks before Grayson spoke. "Thank you for today. For all of this, really." "I should be thanking you," Delia replied. "You're the one saving my shop." "It's more than that," he said quietly. "I've spent years writing about purpose and meaning, but I'd forgotten what it actually feels like. Today I remembered." The streetlights cast soft pools of light on the sidewalk as they walked. Delia understood exactly what he meant. The day had been exhausting, yes, but it was the kind of tiredness that came from doing something worthwhile. They reached her small house, its porch light welcoming in the gathering darkness. "See you tomorrow?" she asked. "Wouldn't miss it," Grayson replied, his smile genuine and warm in the evening light. The next morning dawned bright and clear, a perfect day for new beginnings. Delia arrived early, carrying a box of fresh pastries from the bakery down the street. She found Grayson already waiting, 2 cups of coffee in hand. "I wasn't sure how you'd take it," he said, offering her one. "I got cream and sugar just in case." "Black is perfect." She smiled, unlocking the shop door. "Thank you." They settled at the front counter for their morning strategy session, spreading out papers and plans. Naomi arrived shortly after, bringing her infectious energy and a stack of educational materials. "I've been thinking about the reading program structure," she said, pulling out color-coded folders. "We could theme each month around different genres. Make it fun, you know." Elias joined them mid-morning, carrying paint samples and wood stain options. "For the shelves," he explained, laying them out. "We want something that'll preserve the character but freshen things up." They spent the morning hours planning, their voices mixing with the soft classical music Delia always played in the shop. Regular customers drifted in and out, many stopping to ask about the changes they could see taking shape. After lunch, they changed into work clothes and began painting. Delia insisted on keeping the walls a warm cream color. "It makes the books pop," she explained, but they chose a rich forest green for the trim. As they worked, Grayson found himself drawn into conversations with customers. Mrs. Chen, who'd been coming to the shop for 20 years, shared stories about when Delia first opened. Mr. Rodriguez stopped by with his granddaughter, both leaving with armfuls of books and paint spots on their sleeves from helping. "This is what I missed," Grayson admitted quietly to Delia as they painted side by side. "Real people, real conversations, not just interviews and appearances." Delia nodded, understanding. "Tell me about that. About before, if you want to." He was quiet for a moment, brush moving, steadily. "I was 17 when my parents died," he finally said. "Car accident. The first book. It was my way of dealing with it. But then it became this huge success, and suddenly everyone wanted a piece of me. The industry saw dollar signs, not a grieving kid who needed guidance." Delia's heart ached for the lonely young man he must have been. "That must have been overwhelming." "It was. Still is sometimes." He dipped his brush, careful with his words. "Success is supposed to make you happy, right? But mostly it just made me lonely." They worked in companionable silence after that, the afternoon sun streaming through the windows. Naomi's cheerful humming drifted over from where she was organizing the children's corner, and Elias's steady hammering provided a rhythmic backdrop. The next day followed a similar pattern, but with growing familiarity. Delia taught Grayson how to properly brew her special blend of tea, showing him the importance of letting it steep just long enough, but not too long. 5 minutes exactly, she explained, timer in hand. Any longer and it gets bitter. He took to the routine with surprising enthusiasm, soon taking over the daily tea preparation. Delia noticed how he seemed to relax into these simple tasks, finding comfort in their predictability. The afternoon brought elderly Mrs. Wilson, who'd been visiting the shop every Wednesday for decades. Grayson watched in quiet amazement as Delia helped her select her weekly romance novel, discussing plots and characters as if they were old friends, which he realized they were. This is what books should be about, he mused later as they sorted through a donation box. Connection, community, not just sales figures and marketing plans. That evening, they all gathered on Delia's porch after work, sharing iced tea and watching the sunset. Naomi perched on the railing, excitedly describing her plans for the summer reading program. Aaliyah sat in a worn rocking chair, offering practical suggestions about storage and display options. The third day brought the biggest transformation yet. Early morning light found them all hard at work, with Elias installing new lighting while the others continued painting and organizing. These built-ins are solid oak, he commented, running a hand along the woodwork. They don't make them like this anymore. Naomi had created a cozy reading nook in the children's section, complete with colorful cushions and a small table. Just imagine the stories that will be discovered here, she said, arranging picture books with care. Throughout the day, Delia noticed how naturally they had all fallen into their roles. Elias's quiet competence, Naomi's enthusiastic planning, Grayson's thoughtful attention to detail, they complemented each other perfectly. As evening approached on the third day, they ordered Chinese takeout from the restaurant around the corner. Sitting cross-legged on the newly cleaned floor, they passed containers back and forth, sharing stories and laughter. Fortune cookie, Naomi offered, holding out the basket. You know those aren't really Chinese, Elias commented with a smile. Maybe not, Delia replied, taking one. But they're part of the tradition now. The setting sun cast long shadows through the windows, painting everything in soft gold. Grayson looked around at the group, at Naomi showing Elias pictures of her students' art projects, at Delia contentedly sipping her tea, and felt something settle in his chest. Here, among scattered paint supplies and half-empty takeout containers, he'd found something real. You know, Delia said softly, noticing his expression. Sometimes family is who you choose. He nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. The laughter and warm conversation continued as twilight deepened outside, and the bookshop, refreshed and renewed, seemed to hold them all in its embrace. The morning sun streamed through the newly cleaned windows of Heart's Haven Books, casting warm patches of light across the freshly painted walls. Delia stood behind the counter, arranging a display of local authors when the mail arrived. Among the usual bills and catalogues was a crisp white envelope that made her pause. The return address belonged to Reese Development Corporation. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. The letter inside was brief but pointed. Clayton Reese requested her presence at his office the following afternoon at 2 o'clock. The tone, while outwardly professional, carried an unmistakable undertone of demand. When Grayson arrived later that morning, he found her still staring at the letter. "What's wrong?" he asked, noting her troubled expression. "Clayton Reese wants to meet," she said quietly, passing him the letter. "He's the developer who's been trying to buy up the whole block." Grayson's jaw tightened as he read. "I'm coming with you." "You don't have to." "Yes, I do." His voice was firm but gentle. "We're in this together now, remember." The next afternoon found them in the gleaming lobby of the Reese Development Building downtown. Everything was chrome and glass, cold and impersonal. Their footsteps echoed on the polished marble floor as a sleek receptionist led them to the top floor. Clayton Reese's office matched its owner, expensive and intimidating. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of the city, while modern art pieces that probably cost more than Delia's entire shop decorated the walls. Clayton himself rose from behind an enormous desk, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Mrs. Hart," he said smoothly, extending his hand. "And Mr. Wilde. What an unexpected pleasure. I've read all your books." "Mr. Reese," Delia replied politely, while Grayson simply nodded. "Please, sit." Clayton gestured to the chairs before his desk. "I hear congratulations are in order. Your little literacy initiative seems to be creating quite a buzz." "Thank you," Delia said carefully. "We're very excited about the community response." "Yes, community." Clayton's smile turned sharp. Such a heartwarming concept, though I have to wonder about the stability of such an endeavor. His eyes flicked to Grayson, and the implication was clear. "After all, Mr. Wilde, your recent episodes have been quite public. One might question your judgment in these matters." Grayson's shoulders tensed, but his voice remained steady. "My personal challenges have only strengthened my commitment to this project." "Of course," Clayton said smoothly. "Though my friends in the media might see it differently. Mental health is such a delicate topic, isn't it? The public can be so unforgiving." Delia felt her face flush with anger. "Is there a point to this meeting, Mr. Reese?" "Just friendly concern, Mrs. Hart." He leaned back in his chair. "Development is inevitable. Progress marches on. It would be a shame to see anyone get hurt trying to stand in its way." "Is that a threat?" Grayson asked quietly. "Or observation?" Clayton stood, signaling the end of the meeting. "Something to consider. Good day." The ride back to the bookshop was silent, both of them processing the encounter. Delia's hands shook slightly as she unlocked the shop door. Inside, the warm, familiar smell of books and wood polish helped calm her nerves, but the unease lingered. Elias was there, finishing up some electrical work in the children's section. One look at their faces told him something was wrong. "What happened?" Delia sank into a chair while Grayson briefly explained the meeting. Elias listened intently, his usually calm expression darkening. "He's trying to intimidate you," he said when they finished. "But he's underestimating this neighborhood. People here care about this place, about what you're doing. He has connections." Delia worried. "Money, influence. And we have community," Elias countered firmly. "Real people who live here, who want their children to have a place like this. That matters more than his fancy office and threats." He pulled up a chair, his steady presence reassuring. "Just this morning, Mrs. Chen from the bakery was asking about hosting a story time for the local kids. The hardware store wants to donate supplies for the renovations. People are talking, Delia. They're excited." His words helped, but as darkness fell and Delia prepared for bed that night, Clayton's veiled threats echoed in her mind. She thought of the shop, of the children who'd already started coming in for books, of Grayson finding purpose, of Naomi's enthusiasm and Elias's quiet support. Lying in bed, she stared at the ceiling, her thoughts churning. Clayton Reese might have power and money, but she had something he couldn't buy, a community that believed in what they were building. She was scared, yes, but also determined. Some things were worth fighting for, and Heart's Haven Books was one of them. Her mother's old saying came to mind, "Sometimes the smallest light shines brightest in the darkest places." Their little bookshop was that light, and she wouldn't let anyone snuff it out. With that thought, she finally drifted off to sleep, uncertain of what tomorrow would bring, but committed to facing it head-on. The morning sun had barely touched the shop windows when Delia heard the first shouts. At first, she thought it was just the usual bustle of delivery trucks and early commuters, but the voices grew louder, more insistent, aggressive. She pulled back the curtain, and her heart sank. At least 20 photographers and reporters crowded the sidewalk outside Hart's Haven Books, their cameras raised like weapons. The moment they spotted her, the shouting intensified. "Mrs. Hart, is it true you're exploiting Grayson Wilde's mental state? Did you orchestrate his breakdown to gain control of his money? What's your response to the allegations of fraud?" Delia's hands trembled as she stepped back from the window. The accusations felt like physical blows. She fumbled for her phone, dialing Grayson's number with shaking fingers. "I saw them," he answered immediately, his voice tight. "I'm 10 minutes away. Don't engage with them." The next few minutes felt endless. Delia paced behind the counter, trying to steady her breathing as camera flashes lit up the windows like lightning. When Grayson's car finally pulled up, the crowd surged toward him, but his security team created a path to the door. He rushed inside, looking pale and disheveled. "I'm so sorry, Delia. Clayton's behind this. He leaked documents to the press, fabricated evidence claiming I'm mentally unfit to manage my own company." "What kind of evidence?" Delia asked, leading him to the back room where they could speak privately. "Doctored medical records, out-of-context quotes from former employees." Grayson ran a hand through his hair. "He's painting a picture of me as unstable, and you as an opportunist, taking advantage of my condition." His phone buzzed constantly. With each message, his face grew more strained. "The investors are panicking. 3 major donors have already pulled out of the bookshop promise." Delia felt sick. How could he do this? How can he just lie? "Because he knows by the time we prove the documents are fake, the damage will be done." Grayson's voice was bitter. "This is what he does. He creates chaos, then swoops in to save things by buying them cheap." Throughout the day, the situation only worsened. More reporters arrived. Local news vans parked across the street. Online articles appeared with sensational headlines. Billionaire author's mental health crisis, local bookshop owner's suspicious role, and sources question Wilde's competency in latest venture. By late afternoon, Grayson looked exhausted. He sat at Delia's reading table, staring at nothing while his phone continued its relentless buzzing. She was about to suggest he try to rest when she noticed his breathing change, becoming rapid and shallow. "Grayson?" She moved closer, recognizing the signs of panic she'd seen in her late husband's anxiety attacks. "Grayson, look at me." His eyes were wide and unfocused. I can't breathe. They're going to take everything. The company, the books, this project." His words came in gasps. Delia knelt beside him, speaking softly but firmly. "Focus on my voice. You're safe here. We're in the back room of the shop, surrounded by books. No cameras, no reporters, just us." She gently took his hand, continuing to talk. "Feel the wood of the table under your other hand. Listen to the ticking of that old clock on the wall. You're not alone, Grayson. I'm right here with you." Slowly, his breathing steadied. Color returned to his face. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse. "I'm sorry you had to see that. Never apologize for being human," Delia said firmly. "That's what Clayton doesn't understand. He sees vulnerability as weakness, but it's not. It's what connects us to each other." Grayson managed a weak smile. "How do you always know the right thing to say?" "Years of recommending books to people in crisis." She joked, trying to lighten the moment. "Now, let me make you some tea." By closing time, most of the media circus had dispersed, though a few persistent photographers remained. Grayson insisted on helping Delia close up, methodically straightening books and chairs despite her protests that he should rest. I'll have security stay outside tonight," he said as they finished. "Just in case any reporters try to bother you." "Thank you." Delia locked the front door, then turned to face him. "We'll figure this out, Grayson. Together." He nodded, but something in his eyes worried her, a distance she hadn't seen since that first rainy morning when he'd stumbled into her shop. The next morning dawned grey and cool. Delia arrived early, determined to face whatever new challenges awaited. But when she unlocked the door, the shop felt different. Wrong somehow. She found the note on the counter, written in Grayson's distinctive hand. "Dearest Delia, I won't let Clayton destroy you the way he's trying to destroy me. You opened your door to a stranger in the rain and showed him more kindness than he deserved. I repaid that kindness by bringing chaos to your doorstep. I'm sorry. I've instructed my lawyers to ensure the shop remains yours, free and clear. Please don't try to find me. Sometimes the only way to protect the people we care about is to leave them. Thank you for reminding me what it means to be human." Delia read the words 3 times, her vision blurring with tears. She clutched the paper to her chest, feeling the weight of loss settle over her like a heavy blanket. The morning light streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air, oblivious to how everything had changed. She moved to her usual spot behind the register, still holding the letter, and thought of all the dreams they'd built in just these few short weeks. The children's reading circles that would never happen. The community programs left unstarted. The friendship that had begun to feel like something more. Outside, the city went about its morning routine, unaware that inside Heart's Haven Books, a woman stood heartbroken, holding a piece of paper that represented both an ending and an absence, the space where possibility had lived just yesterday. The morning after finding Grayson's note, Delia stood in her empty shop, fighting back tears. The silence felt oppressive until the bell above the door chimed. Naomi burst in, arms full of construction paper and markers. "I heard what happened," she said, dropping her supplies on the counter. "But we're not giving up. The kids need this program more than Clayton needs another luxury condo." Delia wiped her eyes. "But without Grayson's backing, we start small, we start now." Naomi's determination was infectious. "The sidewalk is public property. Let's take the reading circle outside." Within an hour, they had created colorful signs advertising free story time and books on the block. Naomi arranged a few chairs on the wide sidewalk, while Delia selected picture books. They weren't sure anyone would come, but they had to try. The first child appeared just before 10 o'clock, a small girl clutching her mother's hand. Then came 2 brothers from the apartment building next door. A grandmother brought her grandson. By 10:30, 8 children sat cross-legged on the concrete, entranced as Naomi read, "Where the Wild Things Are," with dramatic flair. "Look at their faces," Delia whispered to herself, watching the children lean forward, completely absorbed in the story. Around 11, a familiar pickup truck rattled to a stop. Elias climbed out, tools rattling in his belt. "Thought you might need some help," he said quietly, nodding at the wobbly card table they'd set up for books. Without fanfare, he began working, tightening loose screws and reinforcing weak spots. The morning stretched into afternoon. More families appeared. Mrs. Chen from the Chinese restaurant brought over egg rolls. Mr. Patterson, a retired English teacher, offered to read the next story. Veterans from the VFW post down the street took turns sharing tales with wide-eyed listeners. "This is what community looks like," Naomi said, watching an elderly man help a toddler sound out words. "This is what Grayson saw when he wanted to save the block." Days began to blur together as they established a routine. Delia opened the shop at 7, setting up the sidewalk space by 8. Naomi arrived between classes, bringing fresh energy and new ideas. Elias appeared like clockwork, fixing what needed fixing, never asking for payment. The media returned on day 3, but this time they weren't chasing scandal. Local news crews captured children spelling out words, seniors sharing wisdom, and neighbors helping neighbors. One reporter interviewed a mother whose son had struggled with reading until joining their circle. "It's not just about books," the mother said, tears in her eyes. "It's about belonging." By the 4th day, they had regulars. Tommy, age 6, who waited on the steps each morning. Maria, a teenager who helped younger kids with pronunciation. Mr. James, a Vietnam veteran who captivated audiences with stories of his service dog. The community's support manifested in countless ways. Someone anonymously delivered a box of new children's books. The coffee shop started sending over hot chocolate for the kids. A local artist painted beautiful murals on the portable chalkboards Elias built for vocabulary lessons. Delia kept the shop open later and later, not wanting to turn away anyone seeking connection. She learned every child's name, their reading levels, their favorite stories. She celebrated their small victories, a completed chapter, a difficult word mastered, a shy child finding their voice. But the long hours took their toll. Her arthritis flared from hours of standing. Dark circles formed under her eyes. Still, she pressed on, driven by something larger than herself. On the 5th night, well past closing time, Delia sat at her desk reviewing the day's events. The shop ledger showed minimal sales, but the impact ledger, the one she kept in her heart, overflowed with riches. 23 children at morning reading circle, 5 new volunteers, countless smiles, endless hope. Her eyes grew heavy as she wrote one final note. "Thank you for showing me that sometimes the smallest acts create the biggest changes." The pen slipped from her fingers as exhaustion finally claimed her. In the quiet shop, surrounded by books and the lingering echoes of children's laughter, Delia Hart fell asleep at her desk. Her last conscious thought was a prayer of gratitude, not for what they'd lost, but for what they'd found, the strength of community, the power of persistence, and the magic that happens when people come together to protect something precious. Her breathing deepened as moonlight filtered through the windows, illuminating the scattered children's drawings, the half-empty coffee cups, and the simple sign in the window that read, "Everyone welcome here." Outside, the city settled into night, but inside Heart's Haven books, dreams continued to grow, page by page, heart by heart, day by day. Delia's neck protested as she lifted her head from the desk. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the worn wooden floor. Her back ached from sleeping in the chair, and her joints creaked as she slowly straightened up. "Oh my," she murmured, glancing at the clock. 6:45 in the morning. She hadn't meant to spend the whole night here. Through the front windows, she spotted movement on the sidewalk. Rubbing her eyes, she walked closer to investigate. Her breath caught in her throat. At least 20 people already waited outside. Parents with children, seniors with folding chairs, teenagers with thermoses of coffee. Tommy, their 6-year-old regular, bounced excitedly on the steps while his mother tried to keep him still. Delia's eyes welled with tears as she unlocked the door. "You're all here so early," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "We wouldn't miss it." Tommy's mother replied, helping to carry chairs inside. "This has become the highlight of our day." Within minutes, the sidewalk transformed into their makeshift classroom. Elias arrived in his pickup truck, bringing fresh lumber to build more benches. Naomi showed up before her first teaching period, carrying a box of donated pastries from the bakery down the street. "Mrs. Hart," called Maria, the teenage volunteer. "Look what's trending." She held up her phone, showing a video that had gone viral overnight. It showed their little reading circle, focusing on Mr. James, the Vietnam veteran, teaching a group of children about service dogs while his own loyal companion sat patiently beside him. The video had millions of views. Comments poured in from across the country. This is what community looks like. Faith in humanity restored. Where is this place? We need one in every neighborhood. By mid-morning, national news vans lined the street. But unlike the predatory paparazzi from before, these reporters approached with respect. They wanted to tell a different story, not about scandal or controversy, but about hope. Mrs. Hart, a young reporter asked gently, could you tell us how this all started? Delia sat on one of Elias's newly built benches, smoothing her skirt. It started with kindness, she said simply. Sometimes that's all it takes, showing kindness to one person who needs it. The reporter nodded. And what about Mr. Wilde? There are rumors about his involvement. Delia's heart twinged, but she kept her voice steady. Grayson Wilde saw the potential in this community. He believed in what we could become. The rest, she gestured to the thriving scene around them. The rest is what happens when people come together to prove that belief right. Throughout the day, more stories emerged. A mother spoke about her dyslexic son finding confidence through their reading circles. A retired teacher described reconnecting with his passion for education. Even Clayton Reese's attempts to discredit them backfired as locals shared stories of how the bookshop had touched their lives. By late afternoon, exhaustion tugged at Delia's shoulders, but joy filled her heart. She watched Naomi lead a group singing the alphabet song, while Elias taught some older kids how to build a small bookshelf. The sidewalk buzzed with life, learning, and laughter. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the street, Delia decided to walk home instead of calling her usual taxi. She needed time to process everything that had happened. The cool evening air carried the scent of blooming jasmine from neighborhood gardens. Each step felt like a quiet victory. This hadn't just survived. They had shown the world what was possible when people refused to give up on each other. The bookshop wasn't just her haven anymore. It had become a haven for everyone who needed one. Reaching her small apartment, Delia made herself a cup of chamomile tea and sank into her favorite armchair. Her phone buzzed with a text message notification. Unknown number. I'm coming home tomorrow. G. The phone trembled in her hand as she read the message again. 5 simple words that held so much meaning. Grayson was coming back, not to his empire or his mansion, but home to their little corner of the world. Delia set the phone down and looked out her window at the city lights twinkling in the distance. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring. For now, she let herself feel the pure satisfaction of knowing that sometimes, just sometimes, doing the right thing was its own reward. Her tea grew cold as she sat there, watching the night deepen, her heart full of gratitude for every person who had stood beside her through this challenge. Whatever happened next, they had already proven that their community's spirit couldn't be broken by pressure or prejudice. The simple text message glowed softly on her phone screen. I'm coming home tomorrow. G. Promise and uncertainty wrapped into one brief message. But Delia wasn't afraid anymore. They had built something stronger than fear. They had built hope. Dawn broke over the city with unusual clarity, washing away the previous day's gloom. Delia had arrived at the bookshop earlier than usual, her hands trembling slightly as she unlocked the front door. The morning light streamed through the windows, catching dust motes that danced in the air as she moved through her opening routine. At precisely 8 o'clock, a single black car pulled up outside. Nothing like the imposing convoy from before. Delia's heart quickened as she watched through the window. Grayson Wilde stepped out, wearing a simple grey sweater and jeans instead of his usual tailored suit. He carried a leather briefcase and moved with deliberate, peaceful steps. When he entered, the bell above the door chimed softly. Their eyes met, and Delia saw immediately that something had changed in him. The haunted look was gone, replaced by a quiet certainty. Delia, he said softly, opening his arms. She stepped into his embrace without hesitation, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. He held her for a long moment, as if making up for all the days of absence. When they finally separated, Grayson's eyes were bright with emotion. "I'm sorry I left the way I did," he began, leading her to their familiar spot by the reading nook. "But I needed to make things right. Really right, not just temporarily fixed." Delia settled into her chair, noting how his hands were steady as he opened his briefcase. "Where did you go?" she asked. "First to my therapist," he explained, his voice clear and strong. "I needed to complete a full evaluation, not just for the board, but for myself. I needed to know I was truly ready for this responsibility." He pulled out a folder of documents. "Then I went to the board. But this time, I didn't go as the troubled artist they needed to control. I went as the CEO who built this company from nothing." A small smile played at his lips. "They weren't expecting that version of me." "What happened?" Delia leaned forward, captivated by the quiet confidence in his voice. "I demanded a full investigation into Clayton's claims. My legal team had already gathered evidence that he falsified documents about my mental state. He tried to paint me as unstable, but we found proof he'd bribed people for false testimonies." The bell chimed again as Naomi entered, followed closely by Elias. They paused in the doorway, sensing the importance of the moment. "Come in," Delia called warmly. "You should hear this too." As they gathered around, Grayson spread several official-looking papers on the table. "This is what I really went to secure," he said, his finger tracing over an elaborate seal. "The entire block has been designated as a historical literacy district." Delia's hand flew to her mouth. "What does that mean?" "It means, Mrs. Hart," Grayson smiled, "that no developer, not Clayton Reese or anyone else, can ever touch this place. The building, the bookshop, everything we've built here is protected by law." Naomi clapped her hands together in delight, while Elias let out a low whistle of appreciation. "But there's more," Grayson continued, pulling out another stack of papers. "The initiative is now fully funded through my foundation, not the publishing company, my personal foundation. The board has no say in it. We have resources for renovations, programs, staff salaries." He turned to Naomi, "Including a full-time position for a children's literacy coordinator, if you're interested." Naomi's eyes widened. "Are you serious? I could leave my substitute teaching position." "The position is yours if you want it," Grayson confirmed. "The same goes for you, Elias. We need someone to oversee the physical restoration of not just this building, but potentially other historical properties in the district as we expand." Elias rubbed his chin thoughtfully, but his eyes sparkled with excitement. "I'd be honored," he said simply. Delia sat back in her chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of these changes. The morning sunlight had grown stronger, streaming through the windows and warming them all as they huddled around the table. "There's one more thing," Grayson said, turning to Delia. "The board wanted me to move the initiative to a more prestigious location. They suggested building a new facility in the financial district." He shook his head. "But I told them the heart of this project isn't in fancy buildings or corporate partnerships. It's here, in this shop, with these people." Tears welled in Delia's eyes as she looked around at her chosen family. Naomi's bright enthusiasm, Elias's steady strength, and Grayson's transformed presence. The morning light wrapped around them like a blessing, illuminating dust motes that sparkled like tiny stars. "So," Grayson said, spreading his hands on the table, "shall we begin again?" They stood together in the warm sunlight, 4 people who had become something more than friends. They had become builders of dreams, protectors of stories, and keepers of hope. Through their window, they could see the neighborhood coming alive, unaware that this ordinary morning marked the beginning of something extraordinary. The light caught the grain of the wooden shelves, the gilt letters on book spines, and the proud new sign they had hung just days ago: Heart's Haven Books, where stories find home. It was more than just a slogan now. It was a promise kept, a future secured, and a new chapter ready to be written. Monday morning dawned bright and clear as Delia unlocked the shop's front door. The bell chimed, welcoming Grayson, Naomi, and Elias, each carrying coffee cups and wearing clothes meant for work. The morning light streamed through the windows, highlighting the tasks ahead: worn shelves that needed rebuilding, walls crying out for fresh paint, and flooring that had seen better days. "Where should we start?" Naomi asked, setting down her messenger bag filled with draft lesson plans. Elias ran his hand along a rickety shelf. "These need reinforcing before we can even think about repainting. Some of them are barely holding together." Grayson nodded, rolling up his sleeves. "I've got a truck full of lumber outside. Let's start with the basics." Throughout that first day, they worked in seamless coordination. Elias taught Grayson the proper way to sand wood, their heads bent together over a piece of oak. "The grain tells you which way to move," Elias explained patiently. "Feel it under your fingers." Grayson listened intently, his usual executive demeanor softening into that of an eager student. "I've never actually built anything with my hands before," he admitted quietly. "There's something special about it," Elias replied. "Making something solid, something that lasts." Meanwhile, Delia and Naomi carefully removed books from the classics section, boxing them temporarily while documenting their exact locations. "Each one has its own home," Delia explained, her fingers trailing lovingly over a worn copy of Jane Eyre. By Tuesday, word had spread through the neighborhood. Mrs. Chen from the bakery arrived with a box of almond cookies. "For the workers," she smiled, setting them near the register. Mr. Patterson, the retired carpenter, brought his tools and began helping Elias with the shelving. The walls received their first coat of paint on Wednesday, a warm cream color that made the space feel both brighter and more welcoming. Children from Naomi's old class came with their parents, wielding small brushes and enormous enthusiasm. Their laughter filled the shop as they painted the lower sections of walls, supervised carefully by the adults. During a quiet moment, Grayson found himself working alongside Elias on a particularly challenging shelf installation. "I've been meaning to thank you," Grayson said softly, holding a level steady. "For being here, for believing in this." Elias paused, considering his words. "You know, when I first heard about this project, I thought it was just another rich man's game. But watching you work here every day, getting your hands dirty, learning, that's earned my respect." The two men shared a look of understanding before returning to their task, their movements more synchronized than before. Thursday brought the local quilting circle, who arrived with homemade sandwiches and determination to help organize the children's corner. Naomi sat cross-legged on the floor with them, sharing her vision for future reading circles while they worked. "We'll have themed weeks," she explained excitedly, spreading out her lesson plans. "Adventure stories, mystery weeks, science exploration, making reading feel like a treasure hunt rather than a chore." Delia watched from her classics section, her heart full as she witnessed her beloved shop transforming into something even more special than before. She had finally found homes for her precious first editions, arranging them in a beautiful new glass-fronted cabinet that Elias had crafted specially. Friday morning began with a surprise. A local artist had painted a beautiful mural on the shop's back wall overnight, depicting children of all backgrounds sitting under a massive tree, reading. Books seemed to float from the tree's branches like leaves, their pages open and inviting. "It's perfect," Delia whispered, touching the wall gently. The weekend brought even more community support. Saturday saw a steady stream of neighbors arriving with donations, both monetary and practical. Old Mrs. Robinson brought her late husband's collection of mystery novels. The high school woodshop class delivered handmade bookends they'd been working on all week. Through it all, the core team worked tirelessly. Grayson proved to be an unexpectedly good painter, his precise nature lending itself well to cutting in clean lines around windows and door frames. Elias moved through the space like a quiet guardian, fixing, adjusting, and strengthening everything he touched. Naomi's energy never flagged as she balanced planning future programs with present restoration work. Each evening ended the same way, the four of them standing together, keys in hand, looking back at the day's progress before locking up. It became their ritual, a moment to pause and appreciate not just the physical changes, but the deeper transformation taking place. By Sunday evening, the seventh day, Heart's Haven Books had undergone a remarkable metamorphosis. The floors gleamed with fresh polish, their old wooden boards brought back to life. New shelves stood straight and proud, their surfaces smooth under fresh varnish. The walls glowed softly in the evening light, the cream paint making everything feel cleaner and brighter. The team gathered one last time in the center of the shop, surrounded by the fruits of their week's labor. Books stood in perfect order on solid shelves, organized by Delia's loving hands. Naomi's reading corner invited young readers with comfortable cushions and carefully curated selections. Every repair Elias had made seemed to strengthen not just the building, but the very foundation of their shared dream. "I can hardly believe it's the same place," Delia said, her voice full of wonder as she turned slowly, taking in every detail. "It's still the same heart," Grayson replied, "just beating stronger now." They stood together in the fading light, four people who had become family through shared purpose and hard work. The shop around them gleamed with new possibility, ready to begin its next chapter. As they moved toward the door for their final evening lockup of the week, the setting sun painted everything in soft gold, highlighting the fresh paint, the polished wood, and the endless rows of books waiting for new readers. Heart's Haven Books had been renewed, not just in appearance but in spirit, ready to serve its community in ways its founder had only dreamed possible. The stars were still visible when Delia woke, her heart already racing with anticipation. She lay in bed for a moment, watching the first hints of dawn creep across her ceiling. Today would change everything, not just for her shop, but for the entire community. Her morning routine took on an almost ceremonial quality. She chose her favorite navy dress, the one that made her feel both elegant and comfortable. Her silver hair she swept into a neat twist, secured with her mother's old pearl pins. Each gesture felt weighted with meaning. By 5:30 in the morning, Delia was unlocking the shop's front door. The fresh paint gleamed in the early light, and the brass handle felt cool and familiar in her palm. Inside, everything waited in perfect order. Shelves aligned, books arranged, windows sparkling. Still, there was so much to do before the noon ceremony. She started with the flowers. The local florist had delivered them the night before, dozens of bouquets in cream and yellow, reflecting the shop's new color scheme. Delia arranged them carefully, placing smaller arrangements between books on the shelves and larger displays near the windows and reading areas. "Need any help?" a voice called softly from the doorway. Naomi stood there, carrying a box of decorations for the children's stage. "Bless you for coming so early." Delia smiled, accepting a warm hug from the younger woman. Together, they moved through their tasks with quiet efficiency. Naomi transformed the reading corner into a magical space, hanging twinkling lights and arranging comfortable chairs in a welcoming semicircle. She positioned a small platform where children would read later, decorating it with fabric panels in rainbow colors. At 7 o'clock, Elias arrived with fresh coffee and pastries for everyone. "Thought we might need sustenance," he said, setting down the treats. He immediately began his own preparations, checking every shelf bracket, testing the new lighting system, and ensuring all the pathways were clear for guests. Delia moved to the back room, where several round tables waited. She carefully pressed crisp white tablecloths, smoothing each wrinkle with determined concentration. These tables would hold refreshments later, but now they reminded her of all the community had done to support this moment. Her hands trembled slightly as she reviewed her speech cards for the 10th time. The words blurred before her eyes. 25 years ago, I opened Heart's Haven books with nothing but hope and determination. Today we begin a new chapter, proving that a community's love for books can overcome any obstacle. Those words get more powerful every time I hear them. Grayson's voice came from behind her. He stood in the doorway, impeccably dressed, but with warmth in his eyes that hadn't been there when they first met. "I'm terrified I'll forget everything once I'm up there," Delia admitted. "You won't," he assured her, stepping forward to squeeze her shoulder gently. "Just speak from your heart like you always do." The morning hours flew past in a whirl of last-minute adjustments. By 11:30, a crowd had begun gathering outside. Delia could see familiar faces pressed against the windows, the retired teachers who'd volunteered as tutors, the children who'd attended sidewalk reading circles, the neighbors who'd brought food and encouragement during the renovation. At precisely 12 o'clock noon, the mayor stepped forward with oversized ceremonial scissors. Delia stood beside her, flanked by Grayson, Naomi, and Elias. The red ribbon stretched across the doorway, a bright slash of color against the fresh paint. "Ladies and gentlemen," the mayor announced, her voice carrying across the assembled crowd, "it gives me great pleasure to officially reopen Heart's Haven Books, not just a store, but a beacon of literacy and community spirit in our town." The scissors flashed in the sunlight, and the ribbon fluttered down. Cheers erupted from the crowd as people began streaming inside, their faces bright with excitement and pride. The afternoon unfolded like a wonderful dream. Children took turns reading on Naomi's decorated stage, their voices clear and confident. Parents wiped away tears as they watched their little ones tackle challenging words, encouraged by gentle guidance from Naomi and other volunteer teachers. Elias moved through the crowd like a knowledgeable guide, showing off the shop's improvements while sharing stories of the renovation process. He seemed particularly proud of the new reading nooks he'd built into, previously unused corners, each one already occupied by happy readers. At 3 o'clock, Grayson called for everyone's attention. He stood near the register where Delia had first sheltered him on that rainy morning that felt so long ago. "Today it is my privilege to announce the establishment of the Delia Hart Promise Fund," he declared. "This endowment will ensure that every family in our community has access to books, regardless of their circumstances. In honor of the woman who showed me what true generosity looks like, this fund will provide free books to local families in perpetuity." Delia gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth. She hadn't known the details of this announcement, and the magnitude of it overwhelmed her. Around her, the crowd erupted in applause and cheers. As twilight began to settle over the town, casting long shadows through the shop's windows, Delia stepped onto the small platform. The crowd quieted, faces turned expectantly toward her. Her prepared speech cards remained in her pocket. She wouldn't need them after all. "Looking out at all of you today," she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart, "I see more than customers or neighbors. I see the people who carried me through my darkest fears and greatest uncertainties. When this shop, this dream, was threatened, You didn't just stand by. You brought chairs for reading circles, you shared books, you painted walls, you believed. She paused, gathering her thoughts as emotion threatened to overcome her. This shop has always been called Heart's Haven, but now I truly understand why. It's a haven because of you. All of you who have made it a sanctuary of learning, of community, of hope. The celebration continued into the evening, with people reluctant to leave this place of joy and possibility. Lanterns glowed softly in the growing darkness, casting warm light over groups still chatting, children still reading, friends still celebrating. Finally, as the last guests departed and the doors were locked, Grayson offered to walk Delia home. They moved slowly through the quiet streets, the evening air cool and sweet around them. "You know," Grayson said softly as they approached her porch, "when I ran into your shop that morning, I was running away from everything, but you made me want to run toward something instead." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "You didn't just save my career or my reputation, Delia. You changed my life. You showed me what it means to lead with kindness, to build something real and lasting." The morning dawned with a pristine clarity that seemed to wash the world clean. Soft golden light spilled across the newly painted facade of Heart's Haven Books, making the fresh colors glow like a beacon in the quiet street. Delia stood before her shop, key in hand, taking in the peaceful moment before the day began. Her heart swelled with quiet joy as she noticed Grayson's sleek car pulling up to the curb. He stepped out holding something wrapped carefully in brown paper, his face bright with anticipation. The transformation in him over these past weeks was remarkable. Gone was the haunted man who had burst through her door in the rain. In his place stood someone grounded, purposeful, at peace with himself. "Good morning," he called out, striding toward her with a warm smile. "I have something for you. For the shop, really." Delia's eyes crinkled with curiosity as she turned the key in the lock. The familiar mechanism clicked, and together they stepped into the fresh interior. Morning light streamed through the spotless windows, catching dust motes that danced like tiny stars above the polished wooden floors. "May I?" Grayson asked, gesturing to the wrapped package. At Delia's nod, he carefully peeled back the paper to reveal a handcrafted wooden sign. The lettering was elegant but welcoming, carved deep into rich mahogany. "Heart's Haven, where stories heal hearts." Delia's breath caught in her throat. She reached out to trace the letters with trembling fingers. "Oh, Grayson," she whispered, "it's perfect." Together, they positioned the sign carefully above the entrance. Grayson climbed the small stepladder while Delia directed from below, making minute adjustments until it hung just right. The morning light caught the polished wood, making it gleam like something precious. The shop's bell chimed merrily as Naomi burst through the door, her arms laden with white bakery boxes that filled the air with the scent of fresh pastries. "Good morning, everyone," she called out cheerfully. "I brought breakfast to celebrate our first official day." She set the boxes down on the counter, opening them to reveal an array of still warm croissants, muffins, and Danish pastries. The sweet aroma mixed with the familiar scent of books and wood polish that had always been Heart's Haven's signature perfume. Before they could dig in, the bell chimed again. Elias entered carrying several buckets of fresh flowers, roses, daisies, and sprays of delicate baby's breath. His quiet strength filled the room as he moved purposefully towards the register area. "These needed to be here," he said simply, beginning to arrange the blooms in vases he'd brought along. His skilled hands created natural-looking displays that seemed to grow organically from their surroundings, adding soft splashes of color throughout the shop. Delia watched her friends, her family really, moving about the space with such care and purpose. Each of them had become essential to this place in their own way. Naomi's boundless enthusiasm and gift for teaching, Elias's steady presence and practical wisdom, Grayson's vision and deep understanding of how stories could transform lives. As they shared breakfast together, sunlight streamed through the windows, catching the edges of book spines and making them glow like jewels. They talked about their plans for the day ahead, Naomi's afternoon reading circle, Elias's final touches on the new reading nooks, Grayson's ideas for author visits and writing workshops. Finally, it was time to open for the day. Delia moved behind her counter, running her hands along its smooth surface. The same bell that had announced a desperate stranger seeking shelter now hung ready to welcome readers and dreamers of all kinds. The soft chime rang out as she pulled open the doors, letting in the fresh morning air. She thought about that rainy day when she'd hidden a frightened man among her shelves, never imagining how that simple act of kindness would ripple outward to transform not just his life, but the entire community. Standing proudly at her post, Delia looked around at her restored kingdom. Shelves gleamed with carefully arranged books. Comfortable chairs invited readers to linger. Children's drawings from the reading circles decorated the walls. Everything spoke of welcome, of sanctuary, of possibility. She caught her reflection in the window. Not just a bookshop owner anymore, but a guardian of stories, a protector of dreams, a builder of community. Touching the smooth wood of her counter, she whispered words that felt like both a prayer and a promise. This is the beginning of something beautiful. The morning light streamed through the windows, catching the edges of the new sign and making the words glow. Heart's Haven, where stories heal hearts. The familiar bell chimed again as the first customer of the day stepped inside, and Delia smiled, ready to begin this new chapter. The morning after the grand reopening, Delia woke before her alarm, eager to start the day. Her steps were light as she walked to the shop, noticing how even the early morning air seemed fresher somehow. She unlocked the door with practiced ease, breathing in the familiar scent of books and polish that welcomed her home. As she moved behind the counter to brew her morning tea, golden sunlight began streaming through the spotless windows. The rays caught the freshly polished hardwood floors, creating pools of warmth that made the entire space glow with an almost magical quality. Delia paused, teacup in hand, simply taking in the transformed space that still felt almost too good to be true. The bell chimed as Naomi breezed in, her arms full of colorful folders containing new lesson plans. Her enthusiasm filled the room as she arranged materials for the first official week of literacy programs. "Good morning," she called out cheerfully. "I can't wait to get started with the children today." Close behind her came Elias, muscles straining as he carried in a beautifully restored reading bench. He'd repaired the old piece perfectly, sanding away years of wear and bringing out the natural beauty of the wood. With careful movements, he positioned it in the children's corner, stepping back to ensure it sat just right. "This should hold up nicely for the little ones," he said with quiet pride, running his hand along the smooth surface. Just before opening, time! The bell chimed once more as Grayson entered, looking polished but relaxed in his casual business attire. He carried a slim leather folder, and his expression held something special as he approached Delia at the counter. "I have something for you," he said softly, opening the folder to reveal official-looking documents. "These papers make you the honorary chair of the Bookshop Promise Initiative. It's permanent, Delia. The shop will always belong to the community now. No developer can ever threaten it again." Delia's hands trembled slightly as she touched the papers, her eyes growing misty. Before she could respond, the first customers began arriving for the day. Children darted in laughing, heading straight for the new reading nook. Senior citizens who'd been coming to the shop for years greeted Delia with warm hugs. Parents stopped to thank her, expressing how much the revitalized shop meant to the neighborhood. Taking her familiar place behind the counter, Delia watched her beloved shop come fully alive with activity and purpose. She thought back to that rainy day when she'd simply opened her door to someone in need, never imagining how that one act of kindness would ripple outward, not only saving someone else's life but completely transforming her own. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.